Behemoth.
With a Freddy Krueger-inspired point-and-click game in Flash, Shawn Tanner started his career developing games, with a very interesting story and a twist of events that brought him where he is today. He has been creating stuff for 20 years and counting. Now, all of those years of experiences and learnings come to a new mobile game he's currently working on. Shawn, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Good. I'm good. How are you?
I'm very good. Thanks for asking. Getting ready for this. We've done a couple of other episodes at this point, and we've got to know very interesting people with very interesting stories, and I cannot wait to hear from you. So just to get things in perspective and just to know when you got into this world, basically, if you can help us taking us a little bit back in history. How did you start working on your first game, and what were you doing back then to get involved into game development?
So I think I probably started working on games with Flash back in, I want to say 2001 or 2002. So I was in high school, and I was starting to frequent newgrounds.com, and I just saw all the games and animations, mostly animations at the time, but games were kind of starting around then. And, I saw all the cool stuff everyone was making. I really wanted to try and be a part of it. I started with, like, when I got my first computer, I did some, like, HTML type stuff and whatever, but Flash was the first time I saw people actually making full-on games, and that was something I'd never realized was possible. I mean, of course it was. I mean, there was other software out, and there was always a way to just, like, make an actual game on your computer if you had the right software and you were part of a development team or whatever, but Flash was really the first kind of thing that made it easily accessible, that was like just one program, kind of an all-in-one package that you could just open up. You could draw pictures, you could just put code right on them, and then with very little work you could just have stuff moving around the screen. So I got started around that time. I spent a couple years just making really terrible things for fun. I made a mixture of games and animations, mostly just to show to my friends. I wasn't trying to make anything out of them, but I think it was in probably 2003 I made my first like real game, I guess, which was just a point-and-click adventure game. I based it on the old like Nightmare from Elm Street series with Freddy Krueger for whatever reason. So I did this game, and I put it up on Newgrounds, and it got fairly popular. I mean, for the time, I don't know the exact play count, but I think Tom had maybe front paged it and stuff like that. And, I was having people play my game and comment on it and talk about it. And it was just, it was amazing. So since I put that out, I just kept going. And, for a few years, I just kind of worked on, like, because back then it was never about money or anything. Everyone I knew just wanted to make cool stuff to show each other. And, to get the review score, get people playing your game, whatever it is. So, but yeah, I mean, I did that for a couple years, and then it probably wasn't until, let's see here, I think in 2006. So I've been doing just like dumb little games for a while. There was a contest that came up in 2006, hosted by Armor Games, and they basically had this thing where they were like, make a game, put our logo in it, and then we're gonna vote on what we think the best game is. It was like like a first through 10th place kind of thing, and they were giving out money, and that was my first experience seeing that there was money to be made. I never thought of it before. Like, obviously websites would host Flash games, and I know that the websites had ads and they would make money, but there never seemed to be an entry point for just someone like me to actually make money. So I thought I would try it out. I made a game called Territory War, and it was basically just like a ripoff of Worms, the battle game. So it was just throwing grenades back and forth and using a gun and whatever. And I guess it got a lot of plays, it got a lot of good feedback, and I guess it was just because there wasn't really a version of Worms online that was free, like you could just play in your browser like that. And I think that was something that people wanted. And for me, it was just sort of like, the weird thing is I didn't even play Worms. I mean, I knew what it was, like that's what I based the game off of, but it wasn't even something I played. So to me, it was just kind of like almost like a tech demo where I just wanted to see if I could remake some of the stuff from Worms. And but I did that with Territory War, and I ended up winning the contest, and so I got first place. I was blown away by that, and I got like somewhere it was like $3,000 or $5,000 for doing that. And I was like, wow, this is, for just like basically a kid living in his parents' basement. I mean, at that time I would have been, I think 17, 18, somewhere in there. I was like, wow, this you can like legit make money with this kind of stuff. Like maybe I can do more with this. So from there, I mean and then I guess I kind of just kept going from there.
So we've talked with other guests in the podcast, and some of them got their first approach to the software, like the Flash software, to start creating things by an uncle, a family, or a friend. How was your case for this? Because now we live in a world where you can just Google something, you get it out of immediately. But back in the day, it was not necessarily like that. How was your first approach to the software?
I mean, I tried everything I could to find out, like, I was like, how do you get this program? And I was just going around like all these websites and everything. And once I got to the point that I was actually, before I even made money, I did purchase a full-on license for the game. But before that, like many other kids my age, I just found a pirated copy online. I couldn't even tell you where it was. I just searched for it, found it, and I think that was the first program I'd ever pirated like that. And it's not really something I like advocate for, because I make my own software that I whether it's games or whatever, that I obviously would prefer that people acquire the normal way. But back then that was just kind of like it seemed like that was how you got Flash, or at least how you started with Flash. And there were people that I think Flash had a free trial. I want to say there was like a maybe free trial period for it, and it was just really easy to extend that into like unlocking the license. So, because I want to say Flash was like $400 or $500, and that wasn't very realistic for me, because I think I just barely started working at a pizza shop, so I couldn't really afford to just blow $500,000 on this program. But so yeah, I think I started with Flash 5. I just found a copy on a website somewhere, and then after some time went by, it wasn't too long. I think in 2006, like when I actually started making money with Flash, is when I bought the license, because I was like, all right, well, I mean, I can justify buying a copy of Flash for this stuff now. So that's how I went with that.
What was your background going into Flash initially? Because for some, it's like the programming got their attention. For others, as you said, right, the animation side, so the art side. What was your approach? You just wanted to create things, or you had some sort of background on where you wanted to start?
Yeah, I mean, I guess mostly just I wanted to create stuff, because back then I started with I'd make like really crappy HTML pages just for the sake of making something, and just to say that I could do it, I guess. Yeah, in terms of games, like it took me a little while. It took a couple years to get into games. Obviously I played a lot of games. Around that time was a lot of Super Nintendo and then GameCube and stuff like that. And I didn't think that games were really something I could get into, because I'd always seen games as like, well, you got to work at like Nintendo, or you got to work for a major company, and you got to like move somewhere and do all this stuff, so games were kind of like out of the range for me. So with Flash at first, I just wanted to make animations. And then it was, I think when I was a sophomore in high school, like a representative from a local college came in and like offered a free programming class to like people that were interested. And so I signed up for that, and I went and did that. And I did like during the summer, I basically just did a programming class. So once I took that class and then I looked into how to make games in Flash, I saw that there was an overlap. Like I could see that some of what I learned applied to how coding worked in Flash with the whole action script system. So I was like, oh, like maybe I can make use of this. And then that's, my first games were really just, they were not anything complicated at all. I was just taking like a giant list of true false flags and just like setting them all to true or false based on where you were in the game, and just like checking them. There wasn't really like much of a programming aspect to it, but yeah, that was really my only background. It was just that I guess I'd taken a course, like one free course in programming, and then I just wanted to make stuff.
Yeah, it seems to be like the approach for everybody. Like you just wanted to create stuff, and this tool showed up, and it was kind of the perfect combination to start in the crazy world. You're talking about your first game. Do you remember kind of the concept or the story for that first game you created? Did you ever share that, like the first game you tried to create?
My first game was so stupid that it's not even like literally all it was just called Bottle Game, and it was just a game with a bunch of bottles on the screen, and you clicked each one and they blew up and it counted a score. And like literally the only thing that made it a game to me was the fact that it took me like a while to figure this out, because that was like my first thing in programming, was that finding out how to like make it permanent. So like in Flash, you could put an event on something and be like, all right, if you click this, play this animation, right? Like that's a pretty easy type thing. And so each bottle was just a little animation. You would click on it and it would blow up. You could keep clicking on it over and over and just keep playing the animation. So it wasn't until I figured out, I can assign a variable to this, and then once it's blown up, I can set like, is blown up to true, and then when I click it again, it won't blow up. And like, to me, that was the game. I was like, now the game has permanence to it. It tracks your score. That was really my first. I don't think I showed that to anyone. So I don't know if that like really counts as my first game, but I remember that being the first thing that I made that was interactive that I was like super excited about.
We've talked about this in other episodes on how it's not just the creation side that kept people motivated with Flash, but also discovering new things that you could do and then implementing them in your game. How was this process for you, or just discovering the potential of Flash, and how were you maybe sharing these thoughts with someone else, or reading maybe on like a Newgrounds or something like that?
Yeah, Newgrounds was a huge part of that because, Tom had introduced the Flash portal. So for a while, it was just Tom Fulp. He owns Newgrounds, and just for anyone listening, but for a while, Newgrounds was just like his games, and then like a select few other games, I think from other people that he uploaded and showcased. But eventually, Newgrounds kind of innovated this Flash portal idea where anyone could submit anything and people would vote on it and review it and stuff like that. And so that's when you really saw this kind of influx of content. And, there's always stuff popping up. It seemed like every week or every month something would show up and I would be like, wow, I didn't know you could do this in Flash. It might be an animation or something with the programming side of things. Like I'd see someone make something that, had like maybe a special effect to it, or like they did something really cool with like physics or whatever. And I would just be like so amazed that you could actually pull that off. And so that led to me, even back then there was a lot of, like there wasn't YouTube quite then, but there was still a lot of online free resources for Flash. There's a website called Kairupa.com, and they hosted a ton of Flash tutorials, and that's where I think I learned a lot of like the basics of how to check for key input in Flash, or how to do like collision detection in Flash. Like they offered a lot of that kind of entry level type stuff. So yeah, it was just that, seeing what people were making, just seeing everyone else's work really fuels you to try and better the stuff that you're making.
So I was reading an interview you gave earlier this year about, some games that kind of were relevant for you for Flash. And I was wondering if you had any specific game or maybe a group of games that help you to just stay motivated, learning, moving, developing, and just creating things that were from Flash, of course.
Yeah, like I was definitely inspired by early just Nintendo games, the original NES, because that felt the closest to me to like something that I could possibly make. Like one of my earlier successful series of games that people seem to enjoy was I made this series of escape games. So you were just like trapped in different locations, like there was a car and a phone booth and all this different stuff. Those were just, and technically even my very first game, the Elm Street game, was also kind of a point and click type adventure game. And those are really just inspired by old games like Shadowgate and Uninvited, which were just these, on the original Nintendo, just these like screen by screen. You would slowly move, you'd click on something, it would take like 5 seconds and load up the next screen, and then you would just like pick up items and put in your inventory. And yeah, so that was definitely the inspiration behind those types of games, because like at the time when I started making stuff, I want to say that we were either in like a GameCube or PS2 type of era, and there was such a wide gap between what you see in Flash and what you see on consoles. So like nothing like that ever entered my mind, but I was happy just trying to make old games like that. And obviously just any game in that, whether it was like an old, just like a Mario game or an old school platforming game. Anytime I was like, well, if they could make this 20 years ago or 10 years ago or whatever, maybe I can try to do this. So I guess I don't think there were a ton of specific games. It was just, in some cases there were a few, like Uninvited, but in a lot of cases it was just sort of seeing what people in the past had made and hoping that I could try to someday reach that, I guess.
That's a good point. A lot of people seem to be attracted to that, it's a big part of the process. Kind of on the similar note, do you have any, I'm pretty sure you have a lot of them, but at least one you can recall that you finished something maybe after hours and you're like, finally I did it?
Yeah, there's been, I'm scrolling through like some of my games here because it's like some of them are so old, but I'm going to go with when I made an online version of Territory War, because that was a brand new, completely new experience for me. I'd had my original Territory War game, which was just like the Worms clone. And then I worked with XGen Studios in like 2008 to make an online version. And they had the server, basically the server-side technology that I could kind of hook into. And so I was just kind of like, I'd never done that before. I was just, they sent me like a document that kind of explained their online, the functions I could call on the server to like pass data back and forth. And of course it took a while to get working, but eventually there came a point where it could connect, basically start up two versions of the game, connect them to each other, move a character on one screen, and then it goes to their server and back, and it moves on the other screen. And then that was like a very big, oh my god, I can't believe I'm actually, doing online gaming. Of course, it was really terribly implemented, but and I wouldn't recommend anyone ever do it that way. But for me, it was a big milestone.
I bet. I mean, it was, we were trying to put things in perspective, but back in the day, that was something huge when, you're just used multiplayer for this kind of games, like all crammed up into just one keyboard, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I was lucky with what I was doing because I was basically making a turn-based game, so I didn't have to sync up anything in real time. Literally all I did was, when you moved a character, I just reported that a key was being pressed to the other computer, and it would just start moving that character. And then when you release the key, it would report that, and it would just stop moving them. And then when you finalized your turn, after you released the key, it would just like sync up the position. So it was really bad. It was just that your character would kind of teleport all around, but it didn't really matter since it was turn-based. So all that mattered was at the end of the turn, everyone was where they should be. So whatever.
Well, to be honest, in some games that still happened.
That's true. Yeah.
So
there's. I think modern games are much better about hiding it, but yeah, in essence, that is still what happens sometimes.
It's still, we can see it, and especially frustrating in shooter games, but sometimes still happens every once in a while.
Sure.
So I have just a question, getting a little bit more into, I guess, the business kind of side of this, just to understand how it worked. But when was that moment from you? I think you talked about before, that you were just creating fun Flash games to share with, people around the world, to become a developer and thinking this is my professional career. You talk about that price, but what about the months after that and making the decision of doing it your career?
Yeah, so the way that worked was, so I had that contest with Armor Games that got me that first prize money. And so back then I would have been, I want to say I was like 19 or 20. Actually, I think I was getting ready to graduate college at that point. So I've been doing games for a while, and I went to school for just a very generic computer science degree. My plan was that I would graduate and I would go to work at just some company, doing database software or some kind of back-end, front-end service, who knows. That was really all I had in mind, and I was still doing games just for fun. But then, the Armor Games thing happened. I made that 5,000, and then graduation was coming up, and I'm still living with my parents, and so I realized I'm in it, kind of at like a key point of like, okay, if I want to do this, I got to make a decision on this. Can I make more games to make more money? Can I turn this into something? Obviously, I can't plan on winning every contest that ever comes out. There was some luck involved with that, but just to realize that started taking a look around, and I see that there are more advertising opportunities, there's sponsorship opportunities. So I talked to Armor Games, and they were like, yeah, we sponsor games. They basically kind of offered this thing where it was like the short-term contract where they're like, for the next, I think, year, we'll sponsor your next 3 games as long as they're within, I guess, kind of like a certain quality range. Like I couldn't make just like nothing, but they're like, yeah, heavily consider your next 3 games for sponsorship type of deal. And so I did that, and I talked to my parents. I basically said, do you guys care if I just live here for like the next year and just try to make something of this? And they had seen that I'd made money from my previous game, and I didn't bother them just living in the basement. So they're like, yeah, we don't care. Go ahead and just do whatever you want. So yeah, so basically that next year I just worked on games, and so I made more money with Armor Games. I put out a couple more. I just did sponsorships and stuff like that. And then, things just kind of kept picking up from there. Like I wasn't making enough to like move out or anything just yet, but it was kind of like a snowball effect of different opportunities that came up. So I had those initial sponsorships. So when I started this series of games called the Escape series, those got popular on another site called Addicting Games. and they offered to sponsor them. So I had this arrangement with them where they would sponsor the games for a similar price as like other games, but they had a prize pool every quarter. They would basically take whatever games on their website had the most views for the month. They would set aside this certain amount of money and then take the top 10 or 20 games, basically divvy up this prize pool that's like, hey, your game got a bunch of plays, so here's like a bonus check. And I started making a lot of money from that because for whatever reason, whatever escape games they had up at the time were just really getting really popular. And so like I ended up earning more money from just that prize pool type scenario than I ever did from their initial sponsorship. That was just the thing that they could offer you was like, hey, we'll sponsor this and we'll give you this prize money. So I started doing that, and then I made additional money because I just put all my own games on my own website. And what I did with the escape games is that since they were point and click adventures, they had puzzle elements to them, and people would get stuck like on a certain puzzle or they couldn't find a certain item or whatever. So I would go to I would make I would write my own walkthrough for the game and put it on my site, and I would link to it from the game. So in the bottom corner it was like, well, if you're stuck, here's the walkthrough, and it would go to my website, and then I had ads on my website and ads on the walkthrough. So I also started making this side money from like people just coming to my site to see how to beat the game, and then they would go play other games on my site, and I had that working for me as well. So it was like this just weird collection of just random stuff that I guess like a strangely diverse like series of revenue opportunities that just kept showing up over the years. And so the final piece of that,
I just want to say that's awesome.
And, yeah,
there's more.
And so the final piece of that puzzle, I guess, was that so when I actually did Territory War Online, that was hosted through XGen, and they had already had an economy set up for online games. So they had the Stick Arena game that they'd been hosting and running for at least a solid year, and they had a system set up where they were showing ads like in the game itself, which did end up being more of a thing for Flash. Like you could like Newgrounds had set up an advertising system, and then there was like Mochi ads, and there were some other companies, but they had this like they had very direct relationships with advertisers where they would place these like high value ads in as people were playing your game. And then we also set up this like really, really crude microtransaction system. So you could buy like weapon skins in the game. You could get like gold weapons or silver weapons. And they already had this thing set up where people could buy their own proprietary currency called Xcash, and then they could spend it in their games. And so if anyone bought Xcash and spent it in my game to buy weapon skins, then I would get a piece of that as well. That was the first time, and because it was an online game that you could, people were always coming to play and battle other people and stuff like that. That actually turned into like a monthly revenue stream for me because, it was getting consistently played so much. So yeah, so those three things together, I guess, was just, sponsorships on games, running my own website with ads, the Territory War, like monthly income. It all added up, and over the course of a few years, it was actually to the point that I had like, I could move out of my parents' house and just go live on my own.
That's awesome. And from there, you just took on full game development, right?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. That was, it was always one thing or the other. And I definitely had, like, don't get me wrong, I definitely had games that made like no money at all. Just, but I had, like, I was really good with saving money. I was pretty frugal. I didn't move out of my parents' house until I had a good cushion for myself. Like I wasn't going to just, jump straight out or anything. But yeah, I just kept trying different games, and I made more escape games. I made another version of Territory War. I just did other mini games, like like I said, some made money, some didn't, and it was just kind of like a mishmash of just trying to work on whatever I thought would work for the next, I don't know, 5 or 10 years or something like that. I did that pretty consistently for a while up until Flash started to die, I suppose, but that's kind of its own additional conversation.
Yeah, actually that's a point that I know it's very, very strong, but in a sense it also started this show, and I know other interviews as well. So we've talked about Flash dying, and we'll also make the explanation that it's not Flash is actually not dying, just the plugging for the browser, right? But
sure, right.
Can we still play your old games in your site? Are they still available? And if so, how's that working?
So thanks to a very talented gentleman named Mike Welsh, so Mike started this project called Ruffle, where he basically made a Flash emulator. So when Flash, quote unquote, started to die, it obviously took quite a while. I think it even became kind of a joke because people were starting to talk about how, mobile devices were coming out, Apple wasn't supporting Flash, and people would talk about how Flash was dying, but it clearly wasn't. You could still play Flash games everywhere. But it kind of got it in our heads that like, okay, maybe Flash isn't going to be around forever, that kind of stuff. And I noticed it myself. As time went on, when I put out new games, when I did like a third version of Territory War. As time went on, each project I put out kind of made less money. It got less views. And I mean, there's a lot of reasons. I mean, again, some games just don't get circulated that well. Some games just aren't the same. But even my like go-to games were getting, they were earning less over time. That was easy to see. So I knew that was on the horizon. As time went on and we got closer to, what I guess you would consider the end of Flash, or at least the end of the plugin, a lot of conservation efforts started popping up. So you have some people who are just, like, I want to say there's, I could be getting the name wrong. I want to say it's called Flashpoint or something else. They basically collected just a ton of Flash content into a big database that they could distribute, the original files to people that want to keep the games alive and have copies on their own local computer. Because you can still play Flash games offline, with your own version of the Flash player. It's just the plugin doesn't work. So you had, people basically collecting old content for preservation. I guess on the other end of the spectrum is what Mike was doing, which was he was basically reverse engineering his own version of the Flash player that would just play like the same way you would take like a ROM file for an NES game and feed it to an emulator and play an old game. Mike was basically doing this for Flash games. And like it was crazy to me because like, in our friend group, like I've had the opportunity to work with Mike on a number of small projects, but myself and our buddy Swain, Michael Swain, and some others, we call Mike the Wizard because he always has like the answer for any question, any programming question you could ever imagine. Mike seems to know the answer to it. And so Mike had told me about that, and I was like, well, that sounds kind of crazy, but I was also like, if anyone can do it, I'm pretty sure Mike can. So sure enough, he just like he would over time he took a couple of my older games and showed me what he was working on, and he would show them like working in this emulator. And it was insane because like they started looking and playing exactly like the old Flash games, like it would in the Flash player. It was like almost indistinguishable. I guess I should say that even before that, Mike had started a previous effort to work on a program called Swivel, which was also, it could record Flash animations and produce video files. So even that was a huge step in letting people create animations in Flash and like put them on YouTube because they could record them through Swivel or distribute them to a wider audience without the Flash player. So Mike had always been invested in preservation, conservation efforts of Flash. But Ruffle was just like a complete, like just a leap above all of that. Yeah, and so the way it works right now is basically Ruffle, I believe it's just a plugin, not even a plugin. I think websites can just install Ruffle on their own pages and just have it auto load. Like they can just pull in a Flash file and just display it, right there in the page. I haven't done that with my own site because my site's just way outdated, like doesn't really get any traffic. So I feel like in the future I will probably just, if someone wants to play my old stuff, I will just point them to Newgrounds where Ruffle is already integrated and they can see it just working right there in the browser. Of course, the caveat to this is that the emulation is not complete at the moment. Flash had this kind of divide where it moved from its original scripting language was ActionScript 1 and 2, which were very similar, and then it moved into an ActionScript 3, which is very different fundamentally, and that divide is kind of where Ruffle doesn't quite work yet. So it can load and play games in ActionScript 3, but they just, I guess the codes behind the scenes, the operating commands are just a little bit different. So, but again, if I think if anyone's going to make it work, it's Mike. And I know that Mike also works with a group of super talented people. They have there's a Discord server for Ruffle, and I popped in there. This was like last year, because even for a short period of time, I was like, this is an open source project, and there's this community building up around it. I was like, maybe I can contribute, but like I quickly realized I was in far over my head with what was going on behind the scenes. So I was like, I will just let the actual smart people handle this, and I'll just I'll be happy to report, if I find a bug in Ruffle, like one of my old games doesn't work, I'll let them know, but I'll let them take care of the actual software for now.
Yeah, it's so important, to have all of this. While I was preparing for all of these interviews and I was going there and checking these games, there were some that I couldn't play, and I'm like, oh man, I really wish I could play them. There's so much history and development, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people that is listening to now will go and check some of those games they haven't checked before. The mechanics are very different to what we have now, right? Of course, it was everything in development, but you can see Like if you go through, the Newgrounds profile of any of the guests that we've had, and you go from oldest to newest game, you can see the development, not just as an individual, but kind of as a group of developers that were creating games at the same time, how they were getting more complex. So it's very important that we keep those things alive and we can just go back and play them. And the fact that you can play them in your browser also helps.
Yeah, what's kind of funny about it is that like it's almost like reinvigorates interest in Flash in a weird way, because now that Ruffle's in development, it's almost fun to like put an old Flash game into it and see how it works. To be like, oh, does it? It's almost like I imagined a similar feeling to someone that made an emulator, like who was piecing it together. And they want to test all these old games, and they're like, oh, like how does Mario 3 run on my emulator? How does Legend of Zelda run? So now it's like I want to go back to my old Flash games and other people's Flash games and just see how Ruffle is taking these games that are so different and do so many different things. I'm like, and just seeing how in most cases Ruffle does make it work, and it's just crazy. But yeah, just seeing the progress of the emulator basically is like my own renewed interest in Flash in a weird way.
I think for a lot of people it's going that way. So moving into kind of the last portion of this conversation, what's going on with you now? What are you working on now? Are you still using Animate? I think you said you're not using it anymore, right?
No, unfortunately not. I'd kind of, when I saw my own Flash projects declining, I made an effort to branch out into other stuff. And so I did one Xbox Live indie arcade game just to try it out. I mean, this was like 5, 6, 7 years ago, so Flash wasn't even dying then, but I was just kind of trying to like get myself to learn other platforms. So I did that. But yeah, as Flash was kind of diminishing, I moved to a framework called OpenFL, which was very handy for me because it used the language hacks, and then but it emulated like the Flash action script tools behind the scenes. So like you would the coding style was nearly identical to ActionScript, and how you would add graphics to the screen and work with sound and keyboard input. And so that was really helpful for me. And then OpenFL through hacks was also able to export for mobile devices and PC and all this stuff. And I know that some of that also exists through software like Adobe Air, which for whatever reason I never really tried. I never got into it. You would think that I should have, because it was it was like almost directly related to Flash. But I just thought I would try something different. So with OpenFL, I made a game called Soda Dungeon, and that was back in 2014. I think we published it in 2015. And that's been actually my main project for like the last 5 or 6 years now. Soda Dungeon is available as a mobile game, iOS and Android. We also do a PC version on Steam. So we did Soda Dungeon 1. Again, I was fortunate enough that it worked out for me. Through whatever channels we went through, it gained a decent amount of popularity, and it was also able to produce that, the additional revenue I needed to keep working on games. That isn't to say that was my first dip into mobile. Like I tried porting some of my old Escape games just like off the cuff to mobile, but they just, the mobile marketplace is way different than online portals or Steam or anything. So, I worked on like 2 mobile games and put them out and just basically got 0 plays, like maybe a couple hundred plays or something like that. So I realized that it definitely wasn't going to be a one-to-one transition. And just because I had people play Escape games of mine on the web, I couldn't just put one out on Android and expect that people will find it, So it's a totally different situation. But yeah, and then for Soda Dungeon 2, we made a sequel to it. We put that out last year. I actually moved to Unity for that because ultimately despite all the Flash games I made, the small games and mobile games, like it always has been a dream of mine to make like an actual console game. You would just sit down, with a controller and just play, right in front of a TV. And yeah, for as many small games as I've made, I've never really gotten close to anything like that. They've always just been kind of like, touch input, mouse input, like you just kind of play in a little window in your browser and like that's it. So I moved to Unity because Unity I know has both pretty good support for mobile platforms, which is good for Soda Dungeon, but then also can obviously produce, fairly high-end games for PC and console too. So I felt like that was probably the best move I could make for now. And so yeah, that's where I've been. I continue to work on Soda Dungeon, and I always have like projects on the back burner that I'm kind of playing with, but nothing major at the moment. So I'm not quite there, but hopefully soon.
Sweet. The secret's always there. So
yeah.
For when they are ready, where can people find you and find more about your work as well?
Honestly, the easiest place is just Twitter at ANP Shawn, SHAWN. I know you can do SEAN, but yeah, I pretty much just post to Twitter. We do a lot of social stuff with Soda Dungeon for like on our subreddit, and we have a separate Twitter account, but it's all very Soda Dungeon centric. So yeah, if anyone's interested in what I do in particular, pretty much just Twitter. I do have a YouTube account where I try to do game developer related updates. Like I've always wanted to try and motivate people to work on their own projects, but doing videos is so time consuming that I end up doing like 1 or 2 videos a year, it feels like. So it's not really my main source of communication, but I'm trying to do a little bit there too, but we'll see how that goes.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Shawn, for your time. Really appreciate it, and for sharing all of those sweet details from back in the day all the way tonight.
Yeah, of course, it was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you very much. And yeah, for everyone listening, I will catch you on another episode because we're not done. And yeah, thank you. See you in the next one. Yeah, thank you. See you in the next one.